Um, this is happening too much, but you will allow me to begin with acknowledging another great loss. I have known that my name is Bracha for many, many years, many years. I've also known that the word for knee in Hebrew is berech. And if you look at the screen, you can see that bracha and berech have the same root, bet resh chaf. And I've known berech for a long, long time. But it's only yesterday that I noted this sharing of root between bracha and berech. And it's so reasonable, so appropriate. And this is what I love about the Hebrew language and how you build from the same root, the same three letters in this case. In reciting a bracha, we bend our knees, so to speak, sometimes figuratively, but sometimes literally, and we bow in recognition of our need for and in appreciation of God's kindness. With this terrible loss of Millie, we need for you, O Lord, to give Jerry, Jennifer, Ted, and Kevin and grandchildren, and all of us, strength to continue without her. And we bend our knees, thanking you, God, for the gift of Millie Lev. In this halacha that's before you, in this law, I believe Rav Berman had Millie in mind. At times, a person may have to recite several brachot on a single dish. How so? If he prepared a soup and then added to it noodles and farfel, potatoes and carrots, and then plums and raisins in equal quantities, then he has to recite borei mine mezonot over the noodles or farfel, and borei pri ha'etz over the plums or raisins, and borei pri ha'adama over the potatoes or carrots, and sha'akol niya bidvaro over the soup itself. As she recites each bracha, she must taste that particular ingredient, and only then may she proceed to eat from the broth as a whole. Millie's devotion to every detail of her culinary masterpieces was matched by her profound dedication to her beloved Jerry, her children, grandchildren, friends, and this community. And these were energized by her ceaseless determination to live every day to the fullest. Yehi zichra baruch. Amen. About 7 or 8 years ago, on one of our annual summer trips to Israel, David and his family, Nechama and her family, and Batya and I, we took 3 cars and we spent a few days up north. And one evening, we discovered that there was meant to be a music festival up in Sfat. And that wasn't terribly far from where we were. So we had dinner, and then we proceed towards Sfat. David is in the first car, and he's using his, GPS? And Nechama is in the middle car with her family, and Batya and I. And my oldest niece, Liel, David's daughter, is with us. And we gradually are climbing towards Tzfat, and it is now dark. And it is a one-way, or at least narrow enough to just be a one-way road. And if we look to the right, we feel like we're going to fall over. Suddenly, a cow comes out in front of the car. My sister, who is very, very strong, she immediately stops and says, let's go back. But when you're on a road like that, you can't go back. You can only go forward. And then, together with the cow, we see another car from the other direction coming toward us. My niece, who I guess was about 15, 16, says the following to Batya and me in our car. She says, you know, I don't believe in this so much, but I think if you haven't, this might be the right time to say Tfilat HaDerech, the traveler's prayer. Now, how many such moments do we have? An experience suddenly before us, evoking a gut, spontaneous need to say something to God. Not many, at least if I speak for myself, certainly not on a regular basis, and hopefully more often for positive things. Rabbinic scholar Max Kadushin, who lived from 1895 to 1980, urged us to open our eyes to what he called everyday occasions. Notice, not just when you're on a road and you're scared, but notice something that is right in front of you, just something normal, and invite it to be a stimulus for a regular expression of appreciation. Knowing human nature and our not very conducive weekly or daily schedules, Kadushin saw the essential role that halakha, Jewish law, is meant to play in enabling every individual to achieve a religious experience. For Kadushin, normative Judaism involves everyday personal encounters with God. It isn't the esoteric, mystical that is essential, according to Kadushin, but rather the normal, the routine. Like Tfilah scholars that we met a few weeks ago, Avram Weiss and David Dishon, Kadushin understood how crucial it is that one embrace Tfilah personally. It's got to be mine. And though both Weiss and Dishon are halachic, Kadushin explicitly sheds light on how very specific laws are crucial in building a praying character, and that ultimately should create an ethical character, which is to say that I will acknowledge the other who is God in heaven and humans on earth. That's what tefillah should end up achieving. I'm thinking beyond myself. So what I'm looking to do today is to look at some prayer-related laws, as Kadushin did, and perhaps give new perspective to what may appear as bizarre and even irrational. Even the paragraph that I read earlier by Rav Berman, I heard some laughter because it did seem, so you're going to say this bracha, you're going to say that bracha, you're going to say that bracha. when I read that, feel the purpose of that is to draw attention to every little thing. Now you'll decide whether for you it's too much, is it exaggerated? But let's just try to open and enter into the world that Max Kadushin does in explaining how halacha and minute laws can actually help us with personal prayer. I remember that, I guess 2 weeks ago, Shelley said, how can it be personal if it's already established for us? And we explained that there's a need for it to be established. Sometimes we're at a loss of words. It makes it possible for us to be in a community. Another reason is that without the sense of obligation, we don't always get to it. But more importantly, not just a sense of obligation, but what Kadushin claims is you have to make it a habit. And once it is part of you, that will make you notice things that till now you perhaps haven't. I know that I hear many people saying, once, please God, this pandemic is finished, that we vow to look at life differently. I pray that that will be true, that we will notice certain things that up till now perhaps we haven't. So let's begin. Kadushin says in text number 1, saying a bracha with kavanah, really meaning it, is largely a matter of focusing attention upon the occasion or stimulus for the bracha. So sometimes you have the experience that I described our way up to Tzfat, and then sometimes you have a daily occurrence when you're about to eat something or drink something. Hence, rules concerning kavanah in the saying of such brachot consist of rules calculated to make a person more aware of the occasions for those brachot. Now, that's a very strong word. You have brachot that are calculated, rules that are calculated. That sounds very devious. But what Kadushin is saying is that once you become used to, it's a part of your everyday existence, knowing that I say a bracha, it's going to be cyclic. I say a bracha, and that makes me pay more attention to the item that I'm trying to appreciate. So I appreciate, and then I say a bracha, and that becomes a part of me, a part of me. Now, let's look at this for example. We have here 3 brachot. Blessed da-da-da-da-da, who creates the fruit of the trees, who creates the fruits of the earth, who creates various kinds of herbs. Which one of those blessings could really capture all 3? Remember, if you want to speak, and please do, unmute yourself.
Adama.
Adama, because all of that is from the earth. So you can't go wrong. So the question is, why did the rabbis differentiate?
Mm-hmm.
For this reason, Kadushin says, if something is actually from a tree, then notice that. And don't just take the general that it's from the earth. And then there are rabbis who said it's not enough to say it comes from a tree, but also if it's a certain type of herb, then pay heed and take note of that. Take note of that. A second example, the Shulchan Aruch, our code of Jewish law from the 16th century. The Shulchan Aruch, for example, writes, one should not stand up for prayer with exposed feet.
Oh, yes,
Okay, I told you some of these are going to sound bizarre, but one should not stand up for prayer with exposed feet if the accepted practice is to greet important people with shoes. So that already says something about halakha, that very often the law varied depending on what community you were from. What was the acceptable mode of behavior in that community? But it begins by saying, pasnish, you're about to pray and you're going to wear teva sandals? The Mishnah Brura, which is a commentary on the code, points out that in hot countries where it is customary to stand before important people barefooted, one need not be concerned, even if one is wearing short clothing through which the legs are visible. He also writes that one should not pray in sleepwear, pajamas, or other clothing that one would not wear to greet important people. Now, I want to ask you, and I'm sure some of you have been on the ritual committee. How do you feel? Because I am speaking tonight very, very practically. We are still talking about prayer, but I don't want it to remain bashamayim, just lofty. I want us to be looking at it in a very tachlis way. So how do you feel about the dress code at a shul?
A bracha.
Stan.
Okay, I'll talk about being the dress code at home rather than in shul, because now my home has become my shul because I'm live streaming at Beth Tikva
Okay.
Shabbat morning.
Okay.
So I felt, what should I wear for Shabbat if I'm getting out of bed at 8:30 in the morning? I'm going to shul in my dining room.
Yeah.
That's right. So I
Go
decided.
ahead.
I decided I would feel better. Not that I'm so religious, but I felt better that I should really put on a nice pair of pants and a white open shirt. And I felt I couldn't sit there with my pajamas on. End of story.
Okay. I appreciate your honesty and sharing that with us. Anybody else?
I agree with it.
Somebody else?
There's what's
Yeah,
called
I
sneas,
feel-
concept of sneas, and I feel offended when I go to different shuls and I see women who are half clad.
In what?
In their clothing.
Clothing.
Okay.
Bracha. Okay,
Okay.
bracha.
Gloria wanted to say something?
Yeah, my friends tease me, but so how when I know I'm going to shul, whether it's downstairs in my kitchen or it's in the synagogue, I don't feel right unless I'm dressed where I feel presentable in both areas, and I still get dressed. I don't put my hat on if it.
Oh, I was going to ask you if you put your hat on.
No, I wear a kippah though. Okay, that's how I deal with that. But no, to me, and it just sort of makes a special point in the day and the weekend. It makes it special. Otherwise, well, I could be watching any old program. It's the same difference kind of thing. No, this is special, and I have to respect the Shabbat, and that's how I feel.
Okay. Yes.
It's Rona. I had my daughter many years ago with me in shul, probably under protest, and she was wearing slacks. And she pointed out to a young girl on the bima, a bat mitzvah girl with a very, very short skirt and sleeveless top. And she said, you know what? I'm dressed far more appropriately. And at that point, I had to agree with her wearing slacks. And if that's the way the women feel comfortable, I don't see anything wrong with it. But just an aside, I had grown up in Beth Sholem where all the women wore actual hats. And when I started going to Beth Tikva and your mother of blessed memory wasn't wearing a hat, that changed everything for me.
Yeah.
Can I just argue the other side? Can you hear
Go
me?
ahead. Yes, Linda.
Well, I do think when you're in a sanctuary, out of respect for the other people, and because it's a place of God, that it's good to dress with snoot, with modesty. But for me in my home is my sanctuary, and I don't feel I have to dress up in order to pray.
Okay, I understand that. And I think none of us
Can I
here.
say something?
Who's that?
Your daughter?
Yeah, I've forgotten your voice. Yes.
I feel like it's more like a norm that we're all just used to dressing normal, that's how we all feel that we should be, but it doesn't actually say that we have to dress. Like here it says don't wear barefoot or whatever, but it doesn't say that we have to wear the hats or wear the skirt or wear like the dress pants or whatever. So it's just we all made that norm for us that if someone does something different, it just seems weird to us, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Thank you. It is what you get used to. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And I would be the last one to say that clothing is what makes the person. But we all know that we do tend to dress a certain way depending on where we're going. And it does have a sense of respect. I remember at school that students were coming in sweatpants, and the day either that a team was going to play at another school, so they had to come dressed nicely, or the day that they were having their photographs taken, and you could see a difference in the way the students carried themselves and behaved. So it's interesting. So now, when I read the word pajamas, it's an interesting dynamic. So at camp, there's tefillah prayer every morning, and it is before breakfast. It has been. So kids come, and you can see that they're still in what looks to me like pajamas. So it's interesting. You want them to feel very, very comfortable in prayer. And you don't want them to feel that something's being forced upon them. On the other hand, is there a message to be given about that this is a special time and that we do dress as a symbol of the kind of respect that we're giving? I'm not saying yes or no, I'm just throwing that out. But my point is that when the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, is dealing with these questions, it isn't a legalism. It appears that way when we don't understand something. It can, but there's something behind it. Now we also know that if it's taken to an extreme and the forest isn't seen, that is not good either. That is not good either. Let's look at another example. Interesting on this discussion. Many people are accustomed to shuckling, swaying back and forth while reciting the Amidah. Now, before I go on, how do you feel about shuckling? When you see somebody, what's your immediate response?
I usually think they're very involved in their prayer.
Okay, so that's one response, Bev, that they're very, very involved in their prayer. Somebody
think
else.
it's just a habit. This is the way they saw it when they were growing up, and they think that's what they have to do in order to establish covenant. And I mean, I used to look sometimes and see some of the people who were shuckling and make a little bit of a judgmental decision and say, he must have been doing a lot of bad things this week because shuckling very hard.
Oh, Marlene.
I don't agree. I don't shuckle back and forth or shuckle side to side, but it's a way of concentrating more. I mean, I'm a dancer at heart, I guess, so I need movement as well as the words to make it meaningful. And to me, that's why I do that.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I understand what you're saying, Marlene, but what Marilyn is saying, and that's why there is choreography in prayer. First of all, it's an opportunity for someone to express in a way that might be more comfortable than another way.
Can I
Okay,
say something?
yes,
When
go.
I'm used to shuckling, it's a way of engaging the whole body, not just the lips. Not you're supposed to use the lips to say the words, to express the words, not only the mind to read the words, but the body to kind of express the words. But I have another issue that the last few years I started taking my tallis and putting it over my head, and it's fine. It just feels lets me separate and engage in tefillah more. But I'm aware sometimes in shul, I'm not doing it for other people. I'm doing it for me, but it can be like a performance. You know, people say, "Oh, look at him! Look at him! He's so into it." You know, so you want to do it, but not make a big deal of it, not to bring attention to yourself. So that's sort of
Interesting.
that's
That's
another
very
issue,
interesting.
right?
Especially now that you know that Marlene is watching carefully. Yeah. Hey, I think there is something to that. You don't want to stand out. You do have a right to put the talit, and usually people will do that during the silent Amida. And if it helps you focus, but you're not looking to draw attention, absolutely, absolutely. So let's see what is said about this. In text 2a, the Shulchan Aruch, for example, writes, one should not stand up for prayer with, 2b. Many people are accustomed to shuckling, swaying back and forth while reciting the Amidah. The Rama writes that this is the proper way to pray lechatchila, to begin with, that you should be fully into it in order to express the excitement and trepidation of the prayer experience, and in order to involve one's whole body, as Joel just said, in the service of prayer, as it is written, all my bones will say, Hashem, who is like you. By contrast, the Shlach, who was a commentator in the 1600s in Prague and then moved to Israel, by contrast, he writes that one should not shuckle during prayer, but just the opposite, that standing motionless strengthens one's kavana. Furthermore, he says, it is not respectful to shuckle. If a person were to come before a human king and begin to shake with his whole body, indeed, the king would immediately dismiss him. If so, one should certainly not act that way in prayer. Now, this is interesting because, as Joel said, he brought up the point, should I be concerned? Should I be concerned with somebody else and how I appear to them? Or if I feel in order to really be praying with kavana that it helps me to move, why shouldn't I be able to do that? And I shouldn't be concerned that somebody thinks, what? Somebody wants to think that, let them think that. I'm being sincere. I'm being sincere. Interesting. But again, an example of so many different small items being discussed. Now, I want to give another example before I move on. you know how you do Netilat Yadayim before we eat, make hamotzi. So you go into the kitchen, you do the special washing of the hands, and then you're on your way back to the table where you're going to make hamotzi. What is supposed to happen in between Netilat Yadayim, washing your hands, and actually making hamotzi and eating the challah? What's supposed to happen?
You're not supposed to talk.
You're not supposed to talk. Now, why?
Message deleted.
Why is that?
New message
You know, people are sitting around the table
from 4
waiting,
1
and
9
some people
0
will
0
talk
4
feeling,
6 1.
why do we
Today,
have to be quiet?
4 p.m.
What
Someone's
is,
phone is on.
what is the idea behind that of washing, and until everyone has washed, that there's silence? It's not just a rule, a legalism for having a rule. What is perhaps the idea behind that?
It gives you time to think about the two brachot, the one you said and the one you're going to say.
Exactly. Kadushin calls that
But
a unit.
you can't break up between that. Part of the whole mitzvah has to be coordinated, and you can't put a wall by speaking. Although
Exactly.
many homes, they sing a nigun while they're waiting, the people who are waiting for the rest, and that's mutar.
Yes, because your husband used to do that, so it was permissible. Yes. Kadushin calls that as an example of unitary entity, that you are combining one bracha with the next, but not just with the bracha, but with the act. You're washing already anticipation of this meal as if it's on the altar for Shabbat, and you want to keep the two together. You're not washing in that moment to really clean your hands. It's symbolic. And so if there's a law that says don't speak, it's for that precise reason that Marlene and Zipporah just said. Your mind is focused, and it's usually not more than a minute or so. You're focused on the mitzvah, really, of eating hamotzi. But we prepare ourselves as they did in the Beit HaMikdash. Now, together with that, when it comes time for Birkat HaMazon, why is there a law that says you should say Birkat HaMazon at the same place where you ate? You know, sometimes you eat, you get up, you move around, you're in another room. Why a law instructing us to say the Birkat HaMazon at the end at that same table? For the same reason, that you ate a meal, and the bracha, the words of thank you that you're about to say, you're connecting that with the act that you just did. Kadushin is trying to make a point that these blessings are meant to concretize our feelings, our expressions, and so that you have to do it together with the act. I'm washing in order to eat my motzi, my challah, and I want to keep that act as something special. And in the same way, I'm remembering when I say the Birkat HaMazon, the meal that I just had, Don't just say a bracha out of the blue, but it's connected with a very concrete action that I have done. Okay, now, let's go on. So it talks about combining brachot with actions, how we dress, movement. Now, what about interruptions during prayer? Have you ever been in shul, any shul, and said hello to somebody. You come in and, and you walk through the aisles and you say Shabbat Shalom, you say Shabbat Shalom, you say hi, and there's somebody who's davening and they haven't responded to you. They keep davening. Have you ever had that experience? As if the person is ignoring you. It might be that you're walking in, if the ushers aren't doing their job that day, when people are saying the Amidah. Okay? Or another prayer, the Shema. From the Shema, the brachot before the Shema, through the Amidah, you are not supposed to talk. Now, imagine this. You're praying, you're concentrating on your tefillah, and somebody comes over to you while you're in the middle and says hello. What are you meant to do? What do you think you're meant to do? Somebody?
Ignore them and finish your prayer. Keep going.
Absolutely. Now, what's problematic about that is you're not sure that that person knows that there's such a law. And so you feel badly that they're going to feel you're just being rude. Now, it could be that the person on his or her own would realize, she's praying and you're really supposed to be concentrating, so I shouldn't be interrupting. That's to begin with. So you're put in a position, though. Should I say a quick hello? Does it really matter if I stop and say, God, wait a second, and I say hello? Well, maybe it's not such a terrible thing, but Kadushin will say, again, you're building a certain type of character of respect. And if you're standing in front, as it said before, a human king or prime minister, and you're talking, and somebody comes over to you and starts speaking, you shouldn't say, Mr. Trudeau, wait a second. In a similar way, well, maybe you should, but okay, if he doesn't give you those vaccines soon. But it might seem, again, is it that crucial to have a law about that, whether I say hello or I don't say hello? Kadushin says yes. Now look at 2C. Even if the king of Israel were to inquire about one's well-being in the middle of the Amidah, okay, imagine you're saying the silent Amidah and the king comes over to you and says how you are. It is forbidden to answer him. However, this is interesting, if a non-Jewish king who is likely to execute him, if he does not answer, addresses him in the middle of his prayer, he must interrupt his prayer, for saving a life takes precedence over prayer. Okay, that sounds very reasonable. Yes? And there were times that you certainly had to be concerned that that might happen. Now, the Mishnah goes on and talks about if a non-poisonous snake is wrapped around his leg, he may not interrupt his prayer. Can you imagine that? Now, first of all, you'd say, well, how do I know if it's poisonous or not? But if it's known that it's not poisonous, then don't stop in the middle. However, if a scorpion or poisonous snake endangers him, he must call for help. For saving a life takes precedence over prayer. Now, again, we know the rule. Pikuach nefesh, saving a life takes precedence over just about everything. Why put in written form such a rule? What is the point that's being made here? To say you might even be in a position where a snake is around your leg, it sounds, oh my God, Who's going to want to pray? First of all, are you really going to be able to concentrate with that snake around you, even if you know it's not poisonous? I don't know. I think I'd find it very difficult. But these are very concrete ways of letting us know we have to establish the importance of praying. And if something is important, you don't let it just be easily interrupted. You don't. You go to the theater or a movie, you get very upset if somebody's making noise. And that's only a movie or a play. So here, if you're talking to God, you're not just going to interrupt it for a small thing, So certainly, if for a snake that's around you, you're not, as long as it's not threatening, then for something less, you're not going to. Okay. Another example, location. Is location important? Sounds like some of you are doing very well. Getting out of your bedroom, davening in your dining room, putting a hat, not a hat. But overall, what do you think is the ideal location for praying?
Wherever you feel a connection to God.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, and that could be anywhere. And some people will tell you.
Nature also.
I'm sorry?
It could also be in nature.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that there's a group that meets at the Tel Aviv beach. Maybe you'll check it out, although it's too long a walk for you from where you are. But they have Kabbalat Shabbat there regularly. Yes.
I was going to say, first of all, make sure you know where east is, right?
Yeah.
And and a quiet room. You don't want your technology blaring in your ears. You want quiet. You want a nice window. You want a little bit of, yes.
Okay. Now, why do you want a window? So look what in text 3a, Rabbi Chia Bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, a person should only pray in a house with windows. As it says, and the windows of his upper chamber were open toward Yerushalayim. Okay, now why do you think praying with windows is so important? Anyone? 3 different possibilities, at least.
You have to be able to have a sense of the outdoors. I can be walking down the street. I don't even need it quiet, but I can feel that I'm praying. And this with windows has to do with being outside, that connection outside. If you are inside, I mean, it
okay.
Helps.
Yes.
Did I mumble? Did I blab?
Sorry?
I said, was I blabbing or was I coherent? It's been a long day.
Coherent. You coherent. I understood your point. I think you're saying that when you're outside, you have an appreciation of the world around you.
Even when you're in shul, I always look towards the clear windows at the top of the bima, and I'm always seeing there's a tree out there that I like to look at, and I very often think about the change of the seasons and what I'm seeing outside.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely.
I don't know what this has to do, if it has anything to do with it, but I always, when I'm at the cottage and I go into the lake and the trees are around me and the sky above me, I say to my kids all the time, this is my best place to pray.
Uh-huh. You know the story about the child who comes home from camp and it's Saturday night and his parents want to make Havdalah and he says, we can't. And they say, why? He says, because there's no lake here. Because Every Saturday night they would make, okay? Certainly being right out there in nature, of course, is ideal. But for various reasons, and especially in a country like Canada where you can't be outside more than maybe 5 weeks a year, that you want to be in a room. Now, with windows. Rashi will explain, the commentator, that by looking, and Marlene's describing, everybody can picture those windows, that you're almost looking up toward heaven and your ideas are focused on your prayers reaching Ribono Shel Olam. Rabbeinu Yonah said, perhaps similar to Tzipora, that when you're looking outside or you are outside, it helps settle you down if it's particularly peaceful. Rabbi Cook, who we have studied, gives the following reason for having windows. He says, there's no doubt about it. Prayer is an intensely introspective activity, but it should not lead us, listen carefully, to belittle the value of being part of the world around us. We shouldn't go into the synagogue. I mean, sometimes I know we wait for Shabbat or maybe even a weekday minyan to be able to go into that enclosed sanctuary. Now I'm using it in two ways, and to be leaving the world behind. But we've said before that we are meant to live in this dialectic of we're leaving the world, but we're also thinking about the world as we read our prayers and understand that they are meant to guide us to know how to live in the world and live with others. And so Cook says, you have to have those windows in order to remind us that we are a part of the world and we're not looking to escape it on a regular basis. Now, I want you to look at these two brachot. So the first one we're all familiar with. I just brought you a part of it. You know, the first paragraph after Shir HaMalot of the benching, Birkat HaMazon. Baruch atah Adonai, da 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 da, and ends with Hazan et Hakol. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the world, who feeds us and the whole world with goodness, with grace, with loving kindness, and with mercy. Blessed are you, O Lord, who feeds all. So we're all familiar with that. Well, this next, what are there, 7 words there, can be said in Aramaic. Blessed is the master of this bread. So there was a time in the time of the Talmud that there was somebody called Benjamin, and he was a shepherd. And for whatever reason, he didn't have time when he finished eating to say the whole Birkat HaMazon. And he needed to know if he was fulfilling his duty to thank God if he just said those 7 words. And the rabbi said in that particular case, yes, that should suffice. What is similar about those 2 brachot? And what is different about them? What do they have in common?
Well, both of them talk to God as the master or the king of the world. And
Yes.
both of them talk to him as being the one who provides us with food.
Okay, now, what's different?
One is real food and the other is loving kindness and mercy and grace and goodness.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, but you know the Hazan et Hakol is talking about when you've had bread. But what is something else that is missing in the shepherd's bracha? And remember, I'm putting this together with the law about windows. See if you can tie those two thoughts together?
It's the whole world.
When we say Hazan et Hakol, beautiful, we are thinking not just of the bread, God, that you gave me on my specific table, but I'm thinking that you've given us, it ends, Hazan et Hakol, that you feed everybody. Whereas Benjamin, he is just thanking God for the bread that he's received. So Kadushin tells us that, all right, maybe he's in a hurry and better he should say that than not say anything, but that is not the way to go, because that is taking away the whole principle of the windows. We are meant never to just be thinking about ourselves, but we are thinking about everybody else. So that even when I'm thanking God for my meal, and you would think, can't I just be grateful for myself? Kadushin says the whole purpose of prayer is building a character of not just appreciating what I get, but recognizing that God gives for everyone. Now, by the way, if anybody's thinking, and this happens a lot when you're talking about this first paragraph of the Birkat Hamazon, Hazan et Hakol, aren't there people in the world starving? So does God feed everybody? What's the answer to that?
There's enough food to feed everybody.
Absolutely, Abe. There is enough food, but it's the way people around the world are distributing it. Yep. Okay. So
I think we're also thanking God, not only that for creating a universe, a world which can generate plants where there's earth and rain and sun, that all together things can grow. We're not just thanking God for this bread, but for creating the possibility of us feeding ourselves, getting food, creating the environment that provides food. Yeah.
Very nice. So that saying this kind of a bracha, that's exactly the point that Kadushin would be making, that when you're saying this kind of a blessing, it should be making you think of how you're going to treat the earth to make sure that this can continue happening and that it's got that ripple effect. Exactly. So just a few examples that give us a sense of how Max Kadushin thought in text 4. Instead of detaching a man from the things of the senses, religious experience through the concept of God's love and bracha makes of the things of the senses, whether it's eating, drinking, seeing, in themselves ordinary and commonplace, things fraught with significance. That even if we're eating an apple, we make that into something special. Worship is thus a moral experience, not only because it is an experience of God's love or of his justice, but also because it engenders an awareness of and a sense of kinship with the whole world. In these two short paragraphs, he sums up what prayer can accomplish. Appreciate the gifts that we have been given and educate us to care for them by saying a bracha, which reinforces us thinking about not just God, but what we can do to keep the earth alive. And in the second paragraph, in that we are thinking of others. We are always thinking of others. Now, I want to finish with an interesting paragraph from Zichrono Livracha, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Several years ago, he joined forces with the head of school of the Ramaz Day School, high school in New York City, and came out with an edition of the Daily Siddur, which is meant to be an educational tool for understanding daily prayer. And in his introduction, Rabbi Sachs writes the following, because as I said, I wanted tonight to be very practical, and I want you to listen to what he says and think about how you feel you look at prayer, how your children, your grandchildren look at prayer, and something very interesting here. He says, I hope you will enjoy this new Koran edition with its multiple commentaries and beautiful design. I wish, Sachs says, it had existed when I was growing up. But in those days, we tended to take prayer for granted. We prayed because Jews pray. Our parents did, so did our grandparents, and so did countless generations before them. We didn't ask questions. We didn't read commentaries. We just prayed, often not really understanding what we were doing. I think that the new approach is better because the more we understand what we say, the more deeply we enter into the act of prayer, and the more profoundly it changes us. How do you feel about what he's written here?
Oh, Bracha,
Yeah.
It's interesting that you're mentioning or reading this from Rabbi Sachs, because in this discussion you're having about prayer, I recall as a young boy going to shul with my Zaidi and his sons, etc., and my uncles. And their prayer book, there was no commentary, there was no English on the other side of the page. They hadn't gone to day school. They didn't I don't know whether they understood every word but they had kavanah. They were praying, and I didn't know a word that they were. I just listened, and you wonder, now that we have the English on the left side and the Hebrew on the right side, do us people who are not conversant in Hebrew, unless they look at the English side, getting that kavanah? I mean, where many of us have been praying because we get a feeling for it, but do you need to understand every word?
Well, that's what I'm asking you, because I think that
maybe you don't.
The proof is that you're more, there used to be a time that they said, if we'll put everything in English, that's going to make people daven better.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work. It takes a chazan like Tibi, who I see is on this session now. Interesting, I just noticed. No, I'm saying this seriously.
Yes.
That you're inspired by a voice, but not just a voice, because with Tibi that he's really davening. I'm not going to say as opposed to other, that he's davening. And that can be enough to move you. But what you raised is the point that I was looking for. Are these rational commentaries and understanding going to give this generation, which maybe has an education that our grandparents didn't have, but is that more important than the gut feeling? There's got to be some kind of balance, but if that's not there, it's a problem. It's a problem.
Yes, but I think it's really a combination of aesthetics. I mean, the beautiful music moves your soul. The words that are connected to an ancient tradition and Jews all over the world inspires. The fact that you're part of a community. And of course, the more kavanah, but I think it's everything. And it does help occasionally to have some interpretive words.
Of course.
I think the translations are not always the best, Maybe this book that Sachs better.
I think you're absolutely right, Linda. All of these elements create a certain type of experience.
Can I say
Absolutely.
something? The Lev Shalem Sidor at Das Shalom in Ottawa, we started using the Lev Shalem Sidor. So every page has 4 columns.
Isn't that the Machzor that's used at Bet Tikva now?
The Lev Shalem, I don't know.
Yes.
But it's got commentary on every page. You've got the Hebrew, you've got a very good translation, you have alternative prayers and that go deeper. Then you've got the origin, the history, the halacha. For people who don't know Hebrew, you've got transliterations in red. It's wonderful.
And does that grab people who wouldn't be otherwise?
More people in our shul are engaged because some are using the transliteration if they don't know Hebrew. Some are interested in the history. Some are interested in the poetry. You've got, much more there. It's like, anyways, and it's not the only one, but I think more commentary engages more, at least of the younger generation, and it can lead to a depth of experience. But we're not going back to our Zetas, automatically by a better book, but it's engagement. That's what it is.
And appropriately, I have one word for that to our subject. Amen.
Amen.
Amen, amen. Okay.
Bracha, I think Linda hit on a couple of, and you did as well, on a couple of very important points. I mean, if I think about the times that I've really felt that sense of kavanah, it has been because I've been part of a kahal that is davening together. The music to me is extremely important. And as the years have gone by, and there's been many of them, I've begun to understand the meanings behind the words. Not so much the exact meaning of each word, but the meaning behind the word. Mm-hmm. And there are times when I get that tingling in the top of my head, and I know I've really reached a point with this congregation of being together in prayer, and that's most important to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a dilemma.
Robert, can I just say one word, Bracha?
If you sing it.
No.
Yes.
I think Rabbi Sachs is making a really valid point. He's thinking, mainly, I think, to the Orthodox, about the Orthodox Jewish community worldwide. And if you look around, you'll see how few chazanim there are nowadays in most of these synagogues. There are hardly any. We have chazanim in conservative movement and reform movement, but Orthodox synagogues have left behind this musical tradition and interpretation of prayer tradition that the chazan can provide for a congregation. And he is sorry for where they have landed, to have these no-frills services where no one's allowed to even start up a tune because we got to get out for kiddush or lunch or whatever. The cholin's getting cold. And it's a very sad situation that's going on in the world. And they think, and when I say they, I include all the experts in the Orthodox movement who have withdrawn music and interpretation, and it is just very sad. So I think he is right about the fact that hopefully this is going to take us to a new level of prayer.
I think that's very important.
We still have it.
Important what you just pointed out, because it shows, I don't know what the word for it is, that on the one hand,
window. This is the window.
The Orthodox communities are davening, but not in the aesthetically pleasing way that we'd like. And that's why sometimes it's hard for some people to find the community that they really want to be in.
I think this is that particular window that makes tefillah clear to everyone. What does it mean? Why do we do it? That they are missing. They are getting check marks, no question.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else?
The music enhances the prayer so much, and it sort of just goes deep into your heart. You know, when you're joining with the chazan and everything else, you know, it just is uplifting.
It sure is. And if you have the kind of choir that Beth Tikva has been blessed with over the years, then that certainly is a plus, because there aren't many like that choir. Anyway.
But
Okay.
While we're talking about music, instruments, like coming a few times that I've come to Slichot with the string quartet and Tibi and the choir, it is incredible experience. The instruments, since as everyone's agreeing, I see, too bad we can't have instruments on Shabbat, or, you know, although there's more and more, we don't do it, but more and more shuls doing it. It really adds so much. Friday night, Yesher Koch, he's doing it.
All right. Okay, people, please stay well. We will meet again in the future. Amen, amen.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
I
you.
see everybody.
Yes.
Thank you, Bracha.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bracha.
You're a great series.
Thank you.
Bracha.
Yasher Koach.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Bracha. Be well.
And get your shot.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Take care. Thank you, Tibby, for
Happy and
joining us.
healthy 2021.
Amen, amen.